Welcome to the fifth lecture in our class. This is on the creation session, and this is the Lutheran perspective. The Lutheran theological perspective is to look at something in a specifically Lutheran context. And in this case, we'll be using Martin Luther and his lectures done in Wittenberg 500 years ago. Our focus statement for Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 is out of nothing, something. Why? To approach this text from a theologically Lutheran perspective requires to look at the Lutheran theology historically and philosophically. Luther's 3 rules for the study of theology and engaging a text are spread throughout this class. Oratio is prayer. Meditatio is to meditate. This is an emptying and an allowing of the text itself to fill you, as opposed to an analysis or a contemplation. Tentatio is Luther's specifically unique addition to Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is an age-old way of engaging with the text. The monks were read to at a meal as they sat in silence and contemplated the text. In Tentatio, Luther says we must always struggle with the text. The method can be summed up in this way. A theologian is a person who is interpreted by the Holy Scripture, who lets himself or herself be interpreted by it, and who, having been interpreted by it, interprets it for others, troubled and afflicted persons. Many Lutherans understand that science helps us understand how God created the heavens and the earth. Evolution is not a discrete process with a specific end or specific beginning. This will be explored a little bit in this first Genesis session on creation, and it will remain relevant in some of the other sessions. Worldwide, there is diversity among Lutherans regarding the interpretation of the days of creation in Genesis 1. A Lutheran confession does not mandate the belief that God created the world in 6 24-hour days. Whatever the case, whether we are speaking of 6 literal days or a change over time, all Lutherans are united on the confession that God is the creator of all, who is continuing to create all creation and all created beings. Looking at a larger picture, we are reminded to be interpreted by the Scripture, not to try to be the interpreter. If it is not a figurative or illustrative story, but a discussion about a relationship in which human beings are the bridge between worlds, what does creation mean to you? Luther was attempting to develop in his students a new identity based wholly in his approach to Scripture. This was not an identity removed from the world. And to our humble human vocations, then Luther has opened the idea of vocation and call to be something beyond ministry and something that is not removed from the world. Luther said that Moses' purpose is to teach us not about allegorical creatures in an allegorical world, but about real creatures in a visible world, apprehended by the senses. In other words, these Bible verses are about experiencing life, not about describing it. Many Lutherans understand that science helps us understand how God created the heavens and the earth. Whatever the case, all Lutherans are united on the confession that God created it all. If we stop asking the question, how, and start asking the question, why, where does that lead us? Usually those kinds of things lead us to a lot more questions. You are, of course, aware of the basic questions that we can always ask. You will notice, however, that I have left out how. A few more specific questions to help you think about this particular section of the lectures on creation. How or why are important and profound different questions. Where does a meditation on Luther's approach to this specific scripture lead you? What does it mean to be interpreted by Scripture, rather than being the one doing the interpreting? When discussing faith, particularly with others, are we describing it, or are we experiencing it? Do we consider it to be an object, or perhaps an environment?